out there?
All right.
Y'all all right?
Yes.
You sure?
Yes.
It's the 1DC 10th anniversary. Y'all got to be a little louder. Y'all all right?
Yes.
So throughout this whole event, clap, stomp, shake your keys, whatever you feel like doing, do it. On June 19, 1865, a group of former slaves celebrated what they called Freedom Day to celebrate their resistance against slavery and overcoming this oppression. Juneteenth, celebrated either on the 19th or around then, has become a holiday that black people all around this country celebrate as remembrance of what we've gone through and also what we've continued to do resisting all forms of exploitation and inequality since then. So I think it's pretty fitting that we are having this very liberatory event, if you would agree, on Juneteenth.
So do y'all believe in freedom?
Yes.
Do you really believe in freedom?
Yes.
Okay, the type of freedom 1DC is fighting for, I'm sure you're walking with us. So let's talk about it.
Yes.
So 1DC, we're believing in a freedom that can't actually be liberated. We can't achieve it through the legal system.
That's right.
That's not the type of freedom
Okay.
Let me tell you the type of freedom we're talking about. We're talking about political struggle.
Okay.
We can only win it if we decide that we're going to put our resources, our bodies, and our time towards fighting for a new DC. Are we ready to do that?
Yes.
You sure you're ready?
Yes.
Well, raise your hand just so I can make sure. You got to put yourself out there.
Put yourself out.
Okay. All right. This is just phase one. You don't know what you signed up for, but you already signed up for it. You're on a committee now if you know it or not.
Ms. Barbara Ransby is a freedom fighter and educator. Ransby has authored 2 books, 2 biographies on Ella Jo Baker and Ms. Paul Robeson. She has been a radical organizer since her days in college. Since then, she has been a radical activist scholar. That's theory and practice. That's very important to remember. That's theory and practice.
Okay.
Just make sure. Serving as one of the founders of African American Women in Defense of Ourselves and the Black Radical Congress. Like Ella Jo Baker, Ransby serves as a fundie, a mentor for student activists involved in various social movements, including Black Lives Matter. Angela Davis, when your name is your title, is a freedom fighter and educator. Davis is the author of 10 books. In recent years, she's taught and protested the range of social problems associated with incarceration and the generalized criminalization of communities affected by poverty and racial discrimination. She draws from her own experiences in the early 70s when she was unjustly imprisoned for 18 months after she was placed on the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list. She's been a part of and founded numerous liberation and prison abolitionist organizations, including Critical Resistance. So welcome our guests. With no further ado, Ms. Angela Davis. And Ms. Barbara Ransby. Yes.
I'm very excited to be here. I'm excited because I love 1DC. I respect so much the organizing work they do, not just the organizing work they do, but the way they do it. Centering poor people, working class people, centering women's leadership. And so I've been a long-time admirer and supporter and student of 1DC, so I'm really honored to be here. And I want to thank all the people who did the work to put this event together. And congratulate you all on your 10th anniversary. It's wonderful to have an organization that can sustain itself for decades. So, and I'm also thrilled to be sharing the stage with my sister, friend, comrade, Angela Davis. We've shared lots of spaces together over the years in different parts of the world, from New York to Chicago to Atlanta to Puerto Rico to Nablus to Ramallah to Hebron to East Jerusalem. And I always feel that I'm on solid ground when I'm standing next to her, and I always feel inspired and strengthened by her example and fortitude in the struggle, and so it's wonderful to be here with her. So we want to start off with these.
Well, Barbara, first
yes.
Let me say that it is really wonderful to be here at this event with this audience sponsored by this amazing organization. I'm so happy to participate in the celebration of the 10th anniversary of 1DC. And I should also tell you that I have known Barbara since she was a graduate student.
Long ago.
I suppose at that time I was considered a sort of mentor, but I have learned so much from Barbara over the years. I guess we could say now over the decades. When she asked me if I would do this event, I said yes, because I trust Barbara and her judgment and her activism and her scholarly work. She is absolutely amazing. Thank you.
That is kind and generous and makes me blush. So 1DC folks gave us some pretty serious questions to wrestle with up here. And when I looked at those questions, I thought, these are questions of organizers. These are questions that are robust and complex, and we'll do our best. I'm glad I'm asking the questions and Angela's answering the questions, because she will deliver more brilliance than I could muster. But the way they began was with a quote from Harriet Tubman. And I know Harriet Tubman is one of the sheroes of 1DC, one of the historical figures from whom 1DC draws inspiration. And it's a very famous quote. Many of you have probably heard it. It's, I freed 1,000 slaves. I would have freed 1,000 more if what? If they had known that they were slaves. And Angela and I were talking about that quote just a little while ago. And I just want to invite you to say a little bit about this idea of empire over the mind, of the ways in which we need to do critical thinking and decolonize our thinking in order to set the stage for a truly liberatory movement.
Yeah. We often forget that much of the oppression, repression we see in the world also operates through us. We forget that, I often talk about it as the state being able to invade our most intimate emotions. And oftentimes we think that these are our ideas when they aren't really our ideas. And so as Harriet Tubman said, yes, if only they had known they were slaves, I could have freed 1,000 more. So what does it mean to begin to decolonize the mind? And I like the term that Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the amazing Kenyan writer, uses, decolonize the mind. When we began to formulate within the context of critical resistance and other abolitionist organizations what it might mean to develop what we called an abolitionist approach, we made the point that it's not only about abolishing the prison industrial complex and recognizing all of the structural connections with, of course, the lack of affordable housing. Where do the resources go instead of to the services that people actually need to have livable lives? I think about the fact that we recognize that if we wanted to abolish a kind of retributive justice, justice as vengeance, if we wanted to imagine a new justice system, we had to ask ourselves, how are we replicating and reproducing those impulses that lead to vengeance and retribution? So we had to realize that, oftentimes, even in the simplest interpersonal relationship, someone says something that is hurtful to us, and what do? We want to say something that is hurtful to them. The first impulse is to get back and to hurt. So how are we therefore then also reproducing and replicating what we think we're fighting against? So this whole question of decolonizing the mind and ending mental slavery is so central.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of that line from Bob Marley's, how do we end mental slavery? Only we can free ourselves. What you're saying now, and this has been your life's work too, we talk about intersectionality, and Angela Davis's work, I remember Women, Race, and Class in 1981. You can clap because pushing us to understand the interconnected nature of different systems of oppression is part of that decolonizing our minds, right? Because one way to think about it all simplistically is, here's my interest, here's your interest, here's my identity narrowly defined, and so forth. And a radical intersectionality pushes us to critique and understand how all these systems of oppression work together. And it's convenient to do it in a more simple, one-dimensional way perhaps, but in terms of a liberatory movement, that's not what it takes. And that's a good segue to the next question. That was our preamble question. That doesn't count as one of our 6. We just had this, we had to include Harriet Tubman. But the first question they asked us to wrestle with is, how does 1DC and other organizations contribute to the building of a truly emancipatory movement? We can think of reform struggles, we can think of movements that might get us half the way there, but what are some of the ingredients for building the kind of movement that will free us from capitalism and poverty, from racism and white supremacy, from sexism and heteropatriarchy, from capitalism, right? From bigotry and other forms of social and economic violence. So that's a tall order, and in some ways that's your life's work and my life's work.
I don't know whether there is a formula that will tell us exactly what we have to do in order to achieve freedom. Because I don't know whether we really understand what freedom is all about. And part of being involved in these struggles over the years is broadening and expanding and making much more capacious our very idea of what it might mean to be free. And I'm thinking about Nina Simone, who's saying, I wish I would knew how it would feel to be free. And I think we have to say that over and over because it changes over time. What freedom means to us today as we move into the 21st century is entirely different from what it might have meant 100 years ago or 50 years ago. The issue of assimilation is one that has plagued us for a long time. And oftentimes victories are represented as bringing more people into an existing framework or set of affairs. And that's what civil rights is all about. And I'm not saying that civil rights aren't important. Yes, absolutely they are, but we have to go further than simply asking to be included into what exists. So of course sometimes we have to ask to be included, but we ask to be included so that we can challenge from within. Because if we simply ask for inclusion, as Malcolm said, so long ago we might be asking to go down with a sinking boat. or the burning house, absolutely. So I think that is one way we can ask ourselves whether we're really moving in a productive direction toward the future. It's not, not just about asking to be included. Virtually every movement that simply asks to be included, the feminist movements that simply ask to be included in all of the things that ask for women to be included and all of the things that men have historically done, have never worked. Have never worked because it's about challenging the entire context, the entire system. So how do we combine that, lack of, or how do we combine that thrust against assimilation with workable strategies for change?
Absolutely. I'm glad, I didn't know how you would answer that, and there's a lot of ways to answer that question, but I'm glad you answered it that way. If any, I guess, example of the limits of assimilation, it's national presidential politics, right? When we were children, we never would have imagined, my grandmother would never have imagined an African-American president.
But this is a time, I think, when we get to recognize that we are living what is going to be hopefully a major turning point in the history of this country. And I love the Black Lives Matter activists. Both the organization, the network, but also the larger movement.
They love you.
Well, I've said many times, it's a great time to be young, but also it's a great time to be old, because the young people, get now to take the reins of history. And those of us who have been involved in these struggles for many decades, we can say, well, this demonstrates that the work that we have done really matters. And so, this is so exciting, and it's amazing that within such a short period of time, so much has changed. Public discourse has changed since in 2 years. As a matter of fact, this is 2016, right? Since 2014. Well, I'm thinking about Ferguson, but I'm also thinking about Trayvon Martin and the emergence of Dream Defenders, of which I am a proud member of the board. And I learned so much hanging out with the 20 and 30 somethings. Yeah, this is really an exciting moment, and although it's a period during which we have become hyper aware, as we should become, of the violence, the police violence, the violence that always underpins racism and homophobia. And we get to see how the whole war against terror strategy has completely failed. It has completely failed. So, this is what I mean. We learn more. We're learning more about what we have to do to be free as we move along in the struggle.
Absolutely. Because I'm thinking, as Angela described how quickly Black Lives Matter as a movement involving many different organizations, including Black Lives Matter Network and so forth, has taken off and has taken hold and has planted seeds, right, and had an impact. What I'm thinking is the work of critical resistance. I'm thinking of the work that went on in the 90s and early 2000s. I think critical resistance was 2000, was it 2000?
1998.
1998.
But we started doing the organizing in 1996.
Yes, okay. Because the language is, the analysis is there. The rebellions have happened, and then people have created new organizational formations, Umi Salah and others in Dream Defenders and Charlene Carruthers and others in Black Youth Project 100, and of course, you know, Opal Tometi and Alicia Garza and Patrice Cullors. But they, you know, where did they look for an analysis to make sense of this? Where did they look for the antecedents to what is happening now? So nothing ever comes out of thin air, right? There's always a prologue to the movement.
And that makes us recognize the work of organizers. Mm-hmm. And you know, 1DC is an organization that attempts, you know, not only to make sure affordable housing is available, but to create a movement in which there is a recognition of the connections between, you know, capitalism and racism and homophobia and sexism. And so I just want to take a moment to pay tribute to all of the organizers, many of whose names we do not know, who have done the work that makes it possible to create an arena, a terrain on which these movements are. Because they never come out of nowhere. I mean, we talk about the civil rights movement, the freedom movement, but hardly anyone talks about the work that was done during the 30s. You know, and the work that that Black communists did in the South, organizing workers. So yeah. And I see there's a 1 minute.
Right.
So, yeah, yes,
She's also a historian. But I think that the next question they wanted us to wrestle with is, of course, very consistent with that, you know, which is to understand the importance of class struggle in all of this. And I shouldn't say this maybe, but there's a meeting going on in Chicago right now of certain sort of progressive forces on the predominantly white left, and you know, looking at the program, there are folks who should be our allies that just still don't get that, right? So I think the importance of offering an analysis of the importance of class struggle, but also how we understand racial capitalism is really important. And of course, Angela's work and praxis, you know, has represented that so often. One of the questions specifically that the 1DC folks had for us was, how do we counter pushback? How do organizers, or how should organizers deal with pushback around the argument that class struggle is so important?
We were talking about some historical signposts, but 2011, Occupy, right? Occupy, and many people argue that, well, you know, Occupy did not have the kind of agenda and did not develop the kind of strategy, didn't have a list of demands and so forth and so on. But I think that Occupy made it possible for us in this country to talk about capitalism in a way that had not occurred since the 1930s. And so we learned a new vocabulary. We learned how to talk about the 1% and the 99%, right? But we haven't yet, and I'm speaking about popular discourse, you know, learned how to reincorporate working class into our vocabulary. You know, how is it that everybody is supposed to be middle class now? You know? And I think it has something to do with the fact that if one looks at a Marxist analysis, one sees that the working class is really central to the dismantling of capitalism. And so there's that resonance there, but then there's also the resonance that you spoke about, Barbara. People don't want to be associated with poverty because if we look at the stage of capitalism today, many working class people are unemployed or have been forced into jobs that without a livable wage. That is why the whole struggle for a livable wage, $15 at the minimum, at the very minimum, why that is so central. But I do think that there is a way, again, return to this question of mental slavery, of the colonization of the mind. When we oftentimes assume in our minds, in our consciousness, the vantage point of those who are responsible for this oppression. We speak as if we were the 1%, right? Although we try to identify with the 99%. And so then there is this question, I think this was included in the notes of, helping the poor people, helping poor people who need housing, right? Or helping these very unfortunate people who are behind bars. And, this missionary approach replicates the very hierarchies that we think we're fighting. There's something that's called solidarity, and there's a way to establish an egalitarian relationship regardless of what class one might objectively belong to. One can still, recognize the basic equality of human beings, and the fact that people who, oftentimes one sees this in people whom we spend a lot of time with, Barbara, in institutions like the one on which, at which this event is happening, that people think, that just because they've studied for a certain period of time, that they know so much more about the world than most And I can tell you that people who have not had the opportunity to receive a formal education are as equipped to make contributions to our to the knowledges about our struggles as anyone else. I can say that had it not been for the work that prisoners did, and I'm thinking about people like George Jackson early on, who argued that we had to try to think about the prison, the role of the prison as an apparatus, and how that institution perpetuated racism. Right. And so he urged those of us way back then, I'm talking about in the late 60s, whose prison work consisted primarily of struggles to free political prisoners, to take a look at the apparatus as a whole. Mm-hmm. And without that, we never would have come up with the idea of a prison industrial complex.
Mm-hmm. We began this part of this question talking about this issue of class and capitalism, and you remind us of kind of imperial systems of knowledge production and how we need to deconstruct that. But also the relationship of prisons to capitalism at this moment. We were talking about this earlier too. But I think sometimes we don't make that connection enough between prisons and this stage of capitalism, between the growth of mass incarceration and capitalism, and why abolition is such an important radical demand if we really are serious about liberation. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, Will, how long do we have for this? I would like to point out that it was Karl Marx himself who pointed out that not only that all value that turns into, that becomes profits for the corporations, ultimately comes from labor, ultimately comes from workers. And so the entire history of the labor movement is a struggle about how much of what the workers actually produce can be claimed. And he argued that this is oftentimes a struggle around wages. It's a struggle around the number of hours the worker works in a day. I mean, it's a lot more complicated. We don't have time to do a whole, lecture on the critique of political economy. But the point is that the struggle to the struggle to reduce the number of hours a day workers work, but with no cut in pay, has been a historical struggle that somehow got stuck at 8 hours. It went from 14 hours, the struggle for a 12-hour day, the struggle for a 10-hour day, the struggle for an 8-hour day, and by now, we should be at 4 hours. Exactly, and therefore, all of the profits that are being devoured by these corporations really ought to be used in terms of giving people more free time. Marx argued that it's a struggle for leisure time, that people should be able to work by now 4 hours a day at livable wages, wages that are enough for housing, for health care, for education, for food, for everything that one needs, and time to express oneself creatively, time to enjoy. With the financialization of capital, of course, it has grown far more intense. This is why we have so many more billionaires in the world now. This is why wealth is becoming increasingly concentrated within a small group of people, and the masses of people in the world are left with very little. Something has got to change. That is not right.
So the question then becomes, how at the other end of the class spectrum do we build a workers' movement, a black labor movement? I don't think it can be done in isolation, but how do we build that kind of labor movement? And especially given, I think, the evolution of trade unionism, the demise of organized, the numbers of organized workers, right? So what does it take to build a black labor movement in a city like DC, in the larger society?
Well, I think first to draw from the history of labor organizing in black communities is absolutely essential. There are so many labor leaders who, and rank and file people who have not been given the credit they deserve for doing work that has enabled the emergence of other social movements. Is this city still majority black?
No.
It's not. It's just recently. So what's the percentage? 49 to 50. Yeah. Well,
It used to be 70, so.
yeah, and I guess we can use this question to reflect on how important it is to develop an intersectional approach. Because it's not possible to build a black labor movement without addressing all of the other issues, without addressing housing, and without dealing with gentrification. Because the decline in the black population in DC is directly related to the processes of gentrification and the pushing of black people out of communities that are made to be more desirable to white people, right? So while I think it's so important to organize and to organize traditional labor movements, but also to organize labor, and in a sense, the unions, the traditional unions, as important as they have been, as important as the work they are doing continues to be, there also needs to be a kind of expansion. And I like, for example, jobs with justice. Because so much of the work people do these days is work that is first of all, it's low wage work because union organizing is not allowed. And so, you know, the Walmart workers, that campaign has been so important, the fast food, McDonald's, and I think that a black labor movement would precisely be a labor movement that acknowledges the connections between the struggle against police violence and against the prison industrial complex, the struggle against heteropatriarchy and homophobia. There would be that kind of a labor movement.
Absolutely. So just, you know, building off of that, I'm thinking as you're talking, you know, the Fight for 15, National Domestic Workers organizing, which of course Alicia Garza, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, is still, you know, in the national leadership, works full time for the National Domestic Workers Alliance. So people who are not at the center of what we've thought of as the labor movement, right? Because domestic workers, like agricultural workers, were left out of many of the labor laws, right? But we have new forms of organization that are organizing those workers. A Fight for 15, organizing McDonald's and fast food workers. So organizing people that are maybe not the traditional constituency of what we think of as the large labor movements. But the other thing I was thinking about too is, I wrote something about this in Dissent recently about the class politics of Black Lives Matter. And I think that sometimes the labor issues, the class and economic issues are buried or seemingly buried in other campaigns and struggles, and we don't recognize them as such, right? So for example, Black Youth Project 100 has a new document called Build Black Futures. It includes a Workers' Bill of Rights. It includes support for the Fight for 15, issues that are across the board, working class issues, labor issues. So that's black leadership of labor struggles, but it's not AFL-CIO, it's not SEIU. But even some of those unions, SEIU was very supportive of the Ferguson protests, for example. Unions took delegations to Ferguson October. So there are a number of connections between traditional organized labor that I think a black labor
the
movement.
ILWU on the West Coast, which has been the most progressive union.
Absolutely.
And you know, let's remember that they shut down the docks from Canada to Mexico for Maria Abu-Jamal. And they were the first to refuse to unload ships from South Africa, and basically served as a catalyst for the whole movement in solidarity with South Africa in the U.S. Yeah.
We need them to be bigger and multiply.
Absolutely.
So I think this challenge of a labor movement means expanding how we see a labor movement and economic justice movement. Even, you know, I think again, from my historian's hat, of how the Black freedom and civil rights and Black freedom movements history gets distorted, and the economic agenda of that movement gets left out. The labor agenda of that movement gets oftentimes left out, and it becomes what you were saying before, you know, a desire to assimilate, when there was always, you know, a demand around economic justice. The March on Washington was for, you know, for jobs, right? So, yeah.
And Dr. King was assassinated in the course of trying to organize the Poor People's Campaign.
Right.
And he was working
a strike in Memphis.
With the sanitation worker strike in Memphis.
Right.
But one last thing before we move on, because I see we haven't gotten the sign yet, is that a black labor movement in DC would have to be internationalists. And I know that we're going to devote one of the questions to a discussion about connections with movements in other places and other countries and other hemispheres. But it seems to me that as people who live in the U.S., we have a tendency to be so provincial and to assume that answers to all of these questions are going to come from within. You know, even those of us who consider ourselves to be radical, you know, forget that this is a place that has produced so many of the problems in the world. So why can't we learn how to look elsewhere? You know, I just recently had the opportunity to teach for a month at the University of Hawaii, and it was so amazing to learn from the indigenous struggles, the struggles for Hawaiian sovereignty, because they precisely are not asking for assimilation. And in a sense, they go against the grain of movements within the U.S. As a matter of fact, they are not the United States of America. Well, anyway, I saw a 10-second sign.
Well, I would just like to sit and talk to you about all the international experiences that you have had. You know, just, you know, people that you've talked to all over the world who are attracted to you because they know, you know, so visibly what your politics are. But that's a, you know, that's a thread of connection to all of us. All those movements from, you know, Australia to Italy to, you know, every place.
Yeah,
and
I just got one in Haiti.
she just came back from Haiti and was telling us in the car about that experience.
I guess I learned internationalism as a very young child. But I always remind myself that the only reason people know my name is because people all over the world join the campaign for my freedom. And every time I go to another country, and you know, we're all aging, but every time I visit another country, I meet people who tell me that they were out in the streets and they were demonstrating and they were signing petitions back in 1970 for my freedom. And that's the only reason I'm here today. I remind myself that that movement gave me my life. And so we have to continue to build those ties across national borders.
I've heard you talk about issues of self-care in this movement, and you know, people talk about sustainability. How do you manage to be a long-distance runner in the struggle for freedom when there's so many ways to get demoralized and depressed and all of that? And so one of the questions, at least this is how I interpreted it, was how our everyday practices, how can our everyday practices allow us to engage in sustained resistance? And then, you know, if you could say a word or two about that. It's not on our teleprompter.
Well, yeah, how do we keep
alive in the face of many defeats?
And they're seeing.
You all stuck that in. Oh, they are.
Yeah, so they've seen the questions.
So you all knew when we went off script. What does Ransby do? Flowing.
Well, you know, we have to develop reservoirs of hope. You know, not every moment is going to be a hopeful moment. But we have to figure out how to stay connected with struggles for justice and freedom in the long run. You know, we don't necessarily have to do the same thing all the time, you know, over years and over decades. but if we can figure out, how to elongate our commitment, because it has to be a commitment of a lifetime. There will never be a moment when we say we have won. And I like what Nelson Mandela wrote in The Long Walk Toward Freedom. Every time you think you've reached a victory, you have to stop for a moment and rest, but then look ahead and realize that the struggle goes on. Luta continua. And so we have to build community. We have to make this our lives. We have to make it a source of joy as well. We have to learn how to incorporate, as you were saying, Barbara, self-care. We have to learn how to take care of ourselves and take care of each other. And there's so many ways to do that. And perhaps during the question and answer period we can elaborate. But it's about building sustainable communities of struggle.
I love that. One of the things that BYP 100 often says, and you all, maybe there's BYP people here, I don't know, but they borrow that Assata Shakur quote, "It is our duty to fight for our freedom." Have you heard this? It is our duty to win. We must love each other and protect each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains. But I love that we must love each other and protect each other. So
and this is how we keep hope alive as well. Is we recognize that we are not alone. We are never alone. It is never only about us as individuals. We are individuals only because of and to the extent that we're able to identify with larger communities. So that's where our individuality comes from.
And I'm always reminded of Vincent Harding, another one of our beloved departed brothers. Vincent Harding said, people who think things haven't changed don't realize how things work. It's not to say that we have arrived or that we are free, as Vanessa said when she came up. We are not free yet, clearly. But there has been fruits of struggle. There have been victories, right? There has been progress. It's not linear and all that, but there has been progress. So I don't know what you would advise organizers to say when folks come with this view of history that, look, all this fighting, where has it gotten us? We're still poor, we still got the police on our backs, and so forth and so on.
Well, it does seem like some things are the same. It does. And sometimes we have to acknowledge that. But sometimes it feels like, even though we've spent decades and decades, and when I first became involved in the movement, it was against police killings and Ku Klux Klan killings, and but then we have to recognize that things are very different. Things are the same, but at the same time, they are vastly different from them. We know so much more. And every time I get, I'd like to pay tribute to organizers, because that is the work that is not acknowledged. That is the work that we don't necessarily consider to be real work, in the same way that the work that domestic workers do is not considered to be work that's deserving of praise and deserving of compensation. But we would not be in this position today where we are able to now finally imagine the possibility of structural change in the way that policing unfolds in this country. We reached the point where many people recognize that it's not just about dealing with the individual cop, right, the individual perpetrator, but there's something wrong with the system of policing. There's something wrong with the system of punishment. But when we talked about abolition, back in the 70s, people thought we were absolutely out of our minds, thought we were crazy, right? And it's only as a result of the organizing work, the work that appears, that is not glamorous, the work of getting people together and educating people and getting people to educate themselves, that we have a very different idea now of what it is going to require to change the system of policing and the system of punishment in this country. And so I'm really thankful for the work, all the work that has gone on all of the decades before. And I tell young people who are always asking me for advice, you know what, as if, by virtue of having been in the struggle, we somehow, have the solution. But I say that you are the ones who are going to find the solution, because you're standing on our shoulders. And as we stand on the shoulders of those who came before, you who are able to reach highest are the ones who are the youngest, right? And so I think that that with the enthusiasm that you see, I've never seen such enthusiasm among young people, especially young black people, young people of color, but also young white people. Not since the 1960s. And this is exciting. So for those who think that nothing has changed, a great deal has changed. Maybe not the structural change that we need. I think we need to make a distinction between the structural changes that are going to be necessary in order to push us in that progressive direction, and the changes in consciousness that will allow us to see more clearly what we have to do in order to guarantee those structural changes.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to also, on this question of how do we keep hope alive in the face of so many defeats, I feel a real sense of promise in this moment, but because I worry about every little thing, and that's my, my function in life, right? I do worry about backlash, and I worry about some of the challenges. And we were talking before about the way in which the state has responded to the movement, and I think it's the strength and the potential of the movement that's caused this response. But one response in particular very recently was the prosecution of Jasmine Richards Abdullah in California, in which she was convicted of the outrageous charge of felony lynching, which, Angela can say something about it. Angela, did you meet with her, or you?
Yeah, I actually saw Jasmine at Cal State LA just shortly before, maybe a week before the sentencing. Felony lynching. And you know what that means. That anyone who attempts to prevent a person from being arrested can be charged with felony lynching. Well, I know this is going a little bit off script, but I'd like to share with you the fact that she knew that she was possibly facing time in jail, and so she asked me how to deal with that and what it was like for me. And I had a long conversation with her, but I also told her that that although this is not going to help her now, she might be interested to know that at this point in my life, I am really grateful to have had the experience of being in jail. It's because I don't know whether my trajectory would have been the same if I had not had that experience. And I had a chance to meet and become friends with and make community with so many other women who were behind bars. And those memories really sustained me. I'm not saying that it wasn't difficult, that it wasn't scary, that I wasn't afraid, all of that, but that one day she'll look back and see how important it was to have been given the gift of spending time with the people that she will no doubt meet in jail. But she's a powerful young woman.
You know what I did when I was thinking about this interview? It may not seem like I prepared. I watched a lot of interviews with Angela and talks that she's given. And there was one where you pointed out how much the Black freedom struggle in this country has benefited from global solidarity, going back to abolition. Yeah. How would you encourage people to respond to that?
I think I was also saying that that having been the beneficiaries of so much global solidarity from, Frederick Douglass, who went to England, and Ida B. Wells, who found support for the anti-lynching movement abroad, and so forth and so on, that we have to learn how to give solidarity, offer solidarity as well. We have to recognize that we can be nurtured by the offering of solidarity. And I was thinking about 1DC and the really important work that's done against gentrification here in the city, which is kind of like ground zero for the country, right? I mean, I live in Oakland, and people are saying, oh yeah, Oakland is the new Brooklyn. But what does that mean? It means that gentrification is taking over, right? And it means that poor people are being expelled, are being deterritorialized. And I use the term deterritorialization because this is happening all over the world. And it seems to me that we ought to be able to create some bonds between indigenous people, people of African descent who are facing this massive deterritorialization in South America, people who face deterritorialization in Palestine, because that's what the struggle in Palestine is precisely over the ability to have spaces in which people can live. And if one looks at how the map of Palestine has changed since 1967, it has gotten so small that it doesn't even make sense to talk about a two-state solution. I'm saying there's a connection between gentrification as we experience it in DC or Oakland and struggles that are unfolding in Palestine and struggles that are unfolding in Latin America.
Absolutely.
And I was just in Haiti to participate in the Caribbean Studies Association, rather Caribbean Studies Association in Haiti. And that was such an inspiring trip because, you see these representations. Haiti is the poorest country in the world. And you see these images of abject poverty and ruins. And what we discovered was that people there are still talking about freedom. And there's so much joy and so much optimism. And I had the opportunity to to visit the citadel that was built by Henri Christophe in early 1800s. I mean, I'm not a military person. I usually don't identify with, guns and all of that. But we went to this fortress that was built atop this very, very high mountain that was accessible to us only by first a four-wheel drive and then mules and ATVs. And you get up there and you see that that people had the determination to defend their freedom. The slogan was "Live free or die." And I thought that as Black people, we always make these pilgrimages to places of sorrow, like the Ile de Gorée or Cape Castle, and my family has done it, and I'm sure many people here have done it, but we don't think about making pilgrimages to places that symbolize the determination to fight for freedom. And when one sees this thing there with all of these cannons from all over Europe, they figured out how to get these cannons all the way up that hill, and they were never used because the French army did not dare try to attack them. They knew that. But it was just an amazing feeling, and to talk to people in Haiti who still inhabit that history, who feel a part of that history. And Black people in this hemisphere owe to the people of Haiti, whatever modicum of freedom we experience today. And so, yeah, we have to figure out how to reach out and how to experience ourselves as global citizens. And that means that we have to break down the notion of citizenship as one that involves papers, right? And so I grew up in a family where education was everything. We had to learn how to read when we were 3 years old, right? But what I remember was that it was a joy. It wasn't a duty. It wasn't a task. It was something we loved. And what I ask now is, how can those who have been diseducated and uneducated retrieve the joy of learning? And a lot of that has to do with learning for a reason, learning in order to imagine a better world, learning in order to produce a better future. And for some, learning is learning through the traditional sources, but for others, it's a very untraditional trajectory, or a trajectory that has become traditional. Many people learn how to read when they go to jail or prison. There are incredible prison intellectuals. And how do we learn how to value, all of those modes of learning? And I think emancipatory education involves not only, it involves an egalitarian relationship between teacher or student, or a more cooperative, collaborative approach to learning. I've talked to many university professors who've decided to go and teach in prisons, and what they say afterwards is that they learned far more from that experience than they could ever have hoped to teach their students behind bars. And I think that kind of approach, that kind of collaborative approach to education is what we need, particularly when we're talking about political education and political study in the context of social movements.
Absolutely.
And I know Barbara has done a lot of that work. She has been responsible for the emergence of so many important organizations and so many young people who who may be at the university or may not be at the university, and so maybe you should, say a few words.
I'll say a few words. I was listening to an interview with Albert Woodfox, the brother who was one of the Angola Three, who spent 43 years, not just in prison, in solitary. And I think Amy Goodman was interviewing him on Democracy Now! And she said, "What did you do?" And he said, "I read." She said, "You can have books." He said, "Yeah, I didn't have my choice, but I and that's what he, and then it's some of the things he read. He read Frantz Fanon, he read, he read, so in unlikely places, right, there is intellectual work being done. In unlikely places, there is knowledge production going on. And I would say, kind of unshackled from all the restraints and constraints we sometimes find in academic institutions, which is, to follow a certain protocol of how knowledge is produced and evaluated and ranked. Because you can sit in a philosophy class or even an economics class sometimes, and by the time you come out of there, your lived experience of 20 or 30 years, right, gets completely, you get talked out of what you've seen and experienced in the material world in your own life. And so that's a slippery slope as well.
But also, there's a way in which the academy colonizes
yes.
Knowledge that is produced outside. You always have to write a footnote with a reference to another scholar, right? And so I try to teach my graduate students how to develop more innovative citational practices, because they're things that come out of movements, out of conferences, speeches that are given by activists. As a matter of fact, the whole notion of intersectionality comes directly from attempting to develop a movement that address race and gender and class at the same time. St. Clair Drake often talked about the epistemology of praxis.
Yes.
The epistemology of praxis, the knowledge that gets produced in the course of struggling for social change, for freedom, and for justice. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is what emancipatory education should look like.
I want to thank you for everything, the cipher that you shared between the two of you so that we could actually learn from your experiences. And Ms. Davis, thank you for giving your life's work to us, and then more of your time.